God, I was thinking about it all week, Stacey. Girl, I tell you, when the seminar is over, all of us will get a chance to read, I'm sure, the book if you haven't read it yet. But you've got to read this book, and you've got to. I hope you're taking notes on what Stacey is sharing with us, but you've got to read it for yourself. And so this week she's going to talk about what to eat and when to eat and what's wrong with our diet. And next week, the book has some beautiful appendix items. So we'll share that with you. Okay, so Stacey, welcome, and you're on.
Come off mute, Stacey.
Yeah. Sorry. Have you passed the area where we share something? Do we do that at the end, Moselle?
We will do that at the end if we have time. Yes.
Okay, great.
If you have something to share, you can always give a testimony next week.
Okay. Okay. Well, what I will just say is, after going through this whole process, I was not sure if I was going to give up meat just yet. I've always done meat in moderation, but 6 days ago I gave it up. So on my 6th day so far.
Beautiful. Wow. Your body is convicting you. That's what we love, when your body tells you.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. It just took over, and I just woke up and I said, today is the day. So
wow, that is amazing.
I'm excited.
Yes, we're excited for you.
Yeah. So of course we've been reading the Obesity Code, Unlocking the Secrets of Weight Loss, and my sister's already asked for my copy. So as soon as I get done with this book next week, then I'll be letting her borrow the book. So maybe one of the sessions that you hold, Moselle, she'll jump on. Okay. So the 19th chapter is What to Eat. This chapter, Dr. Fung highlighted 2 simple things in the beginning. He said, all diets work and all diets fail. And I think we can all appreciate that. So what does he mean? He says, so what does all this mean? He says that whether it's a Mediterranean, Atkins, old-fashioned, low-calorie, low-fat, all diets in the short term seem to result in weight loss. However, they differ at the amount of weight lost. And some you'll lose more, some you'll lose less, but they all work. He suggests that that 6 to 12 months, your weight loss plateaus, and then it's followed by, after that, a relentless regain. So, most of us probably have been on diets, and you'll see where you do well. And then of course, you'll realize down the road that you picked up that weight back, or you didn't, maintain that weight loss. And he says, why? And he says, permanent weight loss is a 2-step process. There's a short-term and there's a long-term problem. And so that was really interesting, because he says that one should understand that the hypothalamic region of the brain determines the body set weight, the fat thermostat. And I think Moselle has talked about that. I remember early on talking about the body and how it, early on talking about that. And so when I read this, he says that the insulin acts here to set the body. He sets the body and set weight higher. So in short, we can use various diets to bring our actual body weight down, but he cautions us that if it falls below the body set weight, the body will naturally activate mechanisms to regain that weight. And that's a long-term problem. So did you know that the body actively resists long-term weight loss? That's what he pointed out, and he highlighted. And so he went on to discuss that on page 219, he says that first, there are about 5 things that we can do. We can reduce our consumption of added sugars, as Moselle's already pointed out. We can, and by that, we can also reduce the consumption of refined grains. We can moderate your protein consumption, increase your consumption of natural fats, and you can increase your consumption of protective fats. I'll go back up to the added sugars. He says, again, read the labels, as Moselle's already been explained to us. And because all of what they say on those labels to get us to pick it up in those packages, they make it look really interesting to pick it up and saying low fat, healthy, and all this. But when you read those labels, and now I've always been intrigued to see what those labels say about, I've always pinpointed on cholesterol and on sodium and sugars. But now, since we've learned all these other terms, now I'm going to really hone in more on what those other words, like, you know, that I never knew what they meant. So now I'll be looking up those words. But basically, packaging foods, I've always tried to stay away from a lot of those packaged foods, especially when I know they weren't healthy. So this book really gives a good understanding of why. And so I really think you should go back and read this chapter, especially chapter 19. And he says also, after that, he points out about snacking. He says, cows graze. He says, humans don't graze. And so I thought that was really interesting because, you know, as kids, we always, you know, when kids are small, we always leave food out and say, oh, they're snacking, leave it out, they're snacking. But he points out that, you know, 3 meals is what most cultures, you know, live by. And he says that, you know, it's okay to have snacks, but if you eat your meals, he says that you should be doing great. So he's not against snacking, but he just says that you just should not snack all the time because you're sending signals that you're not. He says you're making yourself think you're hungry. He says, ask yourself, are you really hungry? You know, and we find now that a lot of these different foods that or ingredients are causing us to be more hungry than we should. And so, so I think it's just by habit. Some things are by habit. Then he talks about beverages, in which we've all talked about, you know, water's the best, but he's also saying about watch the sugars added in your beverages. But one thing that I like, because I love coffee, is that he was talking about there are some benefits to coffee. And then, you know, we all have heard that, but he also said that diabetics that use caffeine free can gain some benefits from doing caffeine free in moderation, of course. So then I will say that I'm going to move on from all of that because you can definitely go back and read that. But he says there are 5 basic steps to weight loss. Reduce the consumption of added sugars, reduce your consumption of refined grains. We've already talked about that. Moderate your protein intake and increase the consumption of natural waste and increase your consumption of fiber and vinegar. That's another one. And also discover the latest and greatest food. For me, this was really, really important because we've been talking about, you know, superfoods. People are always talking about superfoods. And so he mentioned, you know, the acai berries is one. There's always a superfood that people are discovering. And so he's challenging us to always look for what's coming out as something that gives us a lot of benefits. And so there's always, you know, something that comes out that we're learning. He says, but also be cautious of what is that latest and greatest villain, you know, which is sugar and wheat fat and carbs, you know, sugar and things that could be considered carbs. Look and see, because they're always coming out with something that we thought was healthy. And, you know, through research and practice, we learned that some things that we thought were healthy, just like the stevia plant. I've always been a notion that anything artificial in my mind was really not good for you. So I wasn't surprised when you just said that, you know, finding that inside of some stevia packaging, you know, so I've kind of steered away from it, but now I'm learning, you know, that there's some stevia packaging that you probably can consume, but making sure that that ingredient is not there. So I really appreciate, you know, learning more about that. So then we move on over to chapter 20, which is when to eat. And so he says that after all dieting, we lose the weight and then we regain the weight. And so again, the body reacts to weight loss, trying to regain the original body set weight. So then we move on to what I think is more important, not necessarily more important, but something we really, you know, hadn't really heard of, which is breaking the insulin resistance cycle. He says the body's knee-jerk reaction to insulin resistance is to increase insulin levels. So when in turn it creates even more resistance. So to break the insulin resistance cycle, we must have recurrent periods of very low insulin levels. So he says, how do we induce our bodies into a temporary state of low insulin levels? And he says that even after we watch our foods, we eat all these healthy foods, we still he still says that all foods increase our insulin levels. And he says that the only way we can lower that is to abstain from food. So then we move over to fasting, which is what we've been learning, these last couple of weeks about, well, really the whole time, but Moselle has pointed out more about the benefits of fasting. And so when we talk about fasting, which is to break the insulin resistance and lose weight, we're talking about intermittent fastings of 24 to 36 hours. And you can, and this is what Moselle's talked about as far as like every so long, you can do this and it resets your body, detoxes our bodies and everything. And as Moselle pointed out, next week, we'll talk about the Appendix B, and all that stuff is included there, giving you questions and answers to anything that you could probably have a question about. And so it says that fasting is one of the oldest remedies in human history. And just about every culture and religion has used fasting. And so one of the things that I wanted to point out, and I thought was really interesting, is that ancient Greeks believed that fasting improved cognitive abilities. And so for me, that really, stood out. And it says that blood is shunted by your digestive system to cope with the huge influx of food, leaving less blood for brain function. Fasting does the opposite, leaves more blood for your brain. So I'll let that sit there with you, because that's really powerful. And so he says that, so then we learned that this quote that was said, fasting is the greatest remedy, the physician within. Then another quote was, the best of all medicines is resting and fasting. I love that, because I love to rest. I love to stay busy, but then I love to have that meditation time and resting. And I think I got that from my mom. we love to rest. So then also, fasting also in spiritual terms is the cleansing and the purification. And so the body's response to fasting, glucose and fat are the body's main sources of energy. So where glucose is not available, the body adjusts by using fat without health detriment, and the compensation of the natural part of life. Because food scarcity has been a part of our human history, our bodies have evolved processes to deal with the fact of this type of life. So, which means, our body has been equipped to deal with when we don't have food. So we think that when we don't eat, we're going to be malnutritioned, and we learn in this that our bodies can actually go up to 2 months without food. And so, so he points and describes all of that, but and you can go and read, for yourself about that. So I just want to also point out that he says that there's one thing that he highlights about, and this is about the electrolytes. He says that many people think that when you're fasting, well, let me just say this much. Let me just, there are different things that that he addresses. He addresses insulin, growth hormone, the adrenaline, and electrolytes. But then he also says that many worry that fasting causes, again, malnutrition, and the concern is really misplaced. Potassium levels might decrease slightly, but even, as I just said, after 2 months, fasting didn't decrease levels below normal, even without the use of supplements.
What's wrong?
Oh, I'm sorry. I think my screen just went out, so I thought you all went away. Okay, great.
Oh, we're still here.
Okay.
Say that last thing again, Stacey, about you just said about fasting.
Yeah, there's many people worried that fasting causes malnutrition, but we learned that this concern is really misplaced. Potassium levels might decrease slightly, but even after 2 months of continuous fasting, and the studies that he had talked about proved this, that it didn't decrease levels below normal, even without the use of supplements. So that was a really powerful statement that I thought, that as we, fast and detox and stuff, that was really interesting to learn that there have been studies And Dr. Fung, highlight that in this chapter. And then we can look on page 242 that there are many myths about fasting. And I'm just going to highlight that before I end. Let's see on page 242. It says that fasting will make you lose muscle and burn protein. That's a myth, that's a myth. And the brain needs glucose to function. Fasting pushes you into starvation mode and lowers your metabolism. Fasting will overwhelm you with hunger. Fasting causes overeating when you resume feeding. Fasting deprives the body of nutrients, and fasting causes you to just go crazy. I mean, there are lots of things that that you can read about in this chapter about the myths that he highlights that just simply are not true. And but this chapter, was really good. And he says that, as a child, they used to say, he says that as a child we asked them to lose weight. There's a good chance that he'll say that, they skip meals. And he says that and it says that there are rules that that a lot of people have grown up, and so reading and learning for yourself will prove more instrumental than just going by what you've heard as you've been growing up in your environment and your tribe that you come from. So I think that if we can all read and learn, that's going to be the best thing as far as and also all the information that Moselle has sent us and Katrina sent us. All of this helps us to learn for ourselves and make the best decisions for our own bodies.
Amen. Let's give her a hand, everybody.
Thank you.
That is amazing. And I think when I did my presentation near the beginning, it seems like